Hey guys, and welcome back to For I Have Sinned. My name is Jess,
And this is Lauren.
and we're back with another bonus episode. This week, or this episode, actually, it's going to be a two-parter because
Yeah,
there's a lot of information.
so much.
Um, we asked you guys if you wanted us to cover this, and pretty much everybody that replied said yes. So we are going to cover the Golden State Killer.
Yes.
And, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say we felt like it was a good time to talk about it because of recent events that happened with him.
Yes, yes. But before we start, a couple of announcements, really cool stuff happening. We are now on Patreon, which
Yes.
is awesome. We've been wanting to get that launched for a while now, but I think the time is right. Um, and also shout out to Morgan. She is our first patron,
Thanks,
which
Morgan. We love
yes, we
you.
do love you. And there's a few different options for things that you can get. If you go check out the page, it's patreon.com/for I have sinned pod. But we'll link it somewhere. I mean, it's on our Instagram, it's on our Facebook.
Yeah, and I'll put it on the site as well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And another cool thing is that we are going to start taking video. Of us recording certain episodes, and we'll also put even if we don't take video, we'll put up the episodes like just the audio, so you have that option too.
Yeah. So if you wanna watch us talk and be silly, you'll have that option.
Yeah, and remember, we live on opposite sides of the country, so we're doing this over Skype or possibly Zoom. So it might not be the best quality, but hey, you get what you get.
That's it.
All right, so I actually was not super familiar with this case, and Lauren told me some stuff about it. So, Lauren, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. So we're going to do where we switch off a little bit. I'm going to start with his early life. So, his legal name is Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. He was born on November 8th, 1945, in the small town of Bath, which is in western New York State. So it's like right above Pennsylvania, basically. So it's out there. It's a very small
Yeah,
town.
I've seen signs for that now that I think about it.
Really?
Yeah, because my aunt and my uncle moved to Pennsylvania, and when I lived in New York, I feel like when I would go there, when we would drive there, I would see signs for that. I could be
Yeah.
wrong, but it sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's like middle of nowhere, pretty much, small town. His father, who was Joseph James DeAngelo Sr., was a staff sergeant in the United States Air Force, and his mother, Kathleen, was a stay-at-home mom. Just Sorry, guys, somebody just lit some, I guess, leftover fireworks from the 4th of July, and if you hear dogs barking in the background, that's my three puppies losing their minds. I apologize.
I mean, yeah, fireworks are like they look cool and everything, but like, I don't know, save it for Disney World or something.
Yeah,
You
they
know?
freak out, man.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, um, Joseph Sr. and Kathleen would go on to have three more children over the years. Two daughters, Rebecca and Constance, and then the youngest son was named John. The family, of course, moved around a lot because Joseph Sr. was in the military, so they were like all over the place.
Mhm.
They ended up at one point living on base in Germany. This was around when Joseph Jr. was 9 years old, and his sister Connie was 7, and they were playing in a warehouse near their base housing, and two airmen entered the warehouse and actually raped Connie while Joseph Jr. stood by helplessly watching. So that's pretty fucking traumatic to happen at such a young age and to watch it happen to his little sister.
Yeah.
And from what I read, they didn't tell their parents.
Oh God.
They were so afraid of getting into trouble for being in the warehouse in the first place that they just never said anything.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And I guess family, like the home life for the family wasn't great. During their time in Germany, the military police were actually called to the house because Joseph's parents were having a violent fight, and Joseph Sr. was threatened that if they were called out to the house one more time, that he would actually be discharged from the Air Force. They were like gonna kick him out of the military. That's how badly they were fighting.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's also been said that Kathleen, the mother, was abusive towards all of her children, particularly Connie.
Ugh.
So they have a pretty rough home life all around.
Yeah.
In the 50s, at some point, they end up moving back to the States and they land in Rancho Cordova, California, which is located, it's like just east of the city of Sacramento.
Yeah.
In 1959, Joseph Jr. attended Mills Junior High School. His father, Joseph Sr., had actually been sent to South Korea, so he deployed again, whatever, and the family stayed behind in California. They did not come with him this time around. I wasn't able to find out why. I just assumed because Joseph Jr. was going to be starting high school or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
So with Joe Sr. gone, Kathleen began working as a waitress at Denny's. And at some point, she actually began a relationship with a man who was a traveling welder, and he was from Southern California. He had a wife and kids of his own down in Southern Cali, and I guess he would come up for work and see Kathleen while he was up there.
Okay.
So, you know, Kathleen's working to support herself and her kids, and then I guess she's spending time with this other guy, and the family's responsibilities began to fall on Joseph Jr. since he was the oldest child.
Yeah.
He was left to cook, clean, and care for his 3 younger siblings, and this caused even more of a rift between Kathleen and her children. And it was said that Joseph Jr. actually would have like screaming matches with her. He was just very, very angry towards her.
I mean, I can't blame him.
Yeah, I don't blame him at all. He started Folsom High School in 1961, and while he was in high school, he became very close with a young girl named Judy. And, you know, of course, being unhappy with his own home life, he kind of weaseled his way in and adopted her family as his own. So he very quickly was kind of accepted by their family, especially being that Judy was one of 9 children. So she had 8 siblings, and Joseph basically was just like the 10th kid. The parents actually had his class picture hanging up in their home as if he was one of their own, and he referred to them as mom and pop, so they were very close.
Wow.
Yeah. Joseph, Judy, and she had 5 brothers and 3 sisters. They all pretty much had the run of the town in Rancho Cordova. At this time, I guess it was not yet an incorporated town, so it wasn't as, I think it's like pretty bougie now. But a lot of it at that point was undeveloped, or it was actually abandoned grape vineyards. So it was kind of desolate, and the kids would just fuck around outside all day. They would climb fences and get into properties. They would go frog gigging. They would shoot at rabbits. They would shoot at birds, like all types of shit.
Just like straight up latchkey kids.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, didn't really care. They did whatever they wanted. And over time, Joe actually became very close with Judy's oldest brother. I was not able to find an actual name for him, but they ended up becoming best friends. Eventually, Joe's best friend dropped out of high school and joined the military. So now he's kind of, you know, he still has Judy and the others, but he's kind of like, all right, well, now what? And the following year, 1964, Joe did the same thing. He dropped out, got his GED, and enlisted in the Navy. He had initially wanted to be a pilot, but when he joined the Navy, they ended up putting him in the galley, which is like the kitchen, basically. And then he ended up working on a ship below deck as a mechanic.
Okay.
A year after Joe joined the Navy in 1965, the U.S. entered the Vietnam War, and Joe ended up being assigned to the USS Canberra, which this was like a guided missile cruiser. It was a pretty big boat. So he did one tour on the Canberra, and then after that tour, he ended up being assigned to the USS Piedmont, which was a tender boat, and that boat basically like went around and serviced the destroyers that were in battle areas. But it's said that Joe actually worked as a carpenter on those boats, so I don't really know if he was like, I don't know what a carpenter would really do on a boat. If somebody knows, please enlighten me. So anyway, I did a little bit of reading on the history of those two boats because I wanted to know if they saw any action. And the USS Canberra did see some action, but I'm almost positive it was actually during the time that Joseph was on the Piedmont. And now the Piedmont, like the Piedmont basically just went around to different ports and did repairs. So despite being like active during 22 months of the Vietnam War, his Navy career as a damage controlman second class was actually described as unremarkable. Like nothing really happened. He spent 3 years at sea and 1 year in the Naval Reserves, and then he was honorably discharged. So, like, nothing bad happened, nothing crazy happened. He just, whatever, did his contract, and that was it. After being discharged from the Navy, Joseph returned to California. His father, he was in South Korea, then he was in Florida, and then he ended up back in South Korea. And he actually just never came back to his family. He was just didn't come back.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he just, he worked his military career, retired, and went back to South Korea, where he actually remarried and had 3 kids with his new wife. And get this shit, he named his 3 kids the same names as his first set of children. So he named them Rebecca, Joseph Jr., and Constance. And then the youngest was John, but he didn't have a 4th with this new wife. He only had 3, but named him after the first 3 kids.
That's some weird fucking shit.
Isn't that weird? I'm like, who does that?
Yeah, well, who is it? Is it George Foreman that like all of his sons are named George?
Yeah, George or Georgina.
So weird.
Fucking weird. Very weird. So Joseph's mother, Kathleen, actually ended up marrying, his name was Jack Bosanko, and it was the traveling welder that she had been having an affair with.
Right.
They ended up getting married, so good for them. It worked out. Joseph ended up moving in with them. They lived in one of the suburbs a little further out of Sacramento, called Auburn.
Okay.
So yeah, he moved in with them. And after settling in, he's now 23 years old and starting college. So for that time, that was actually, he was much older. And a lot of his friends said that he tried to fit in with the younger kids. And it was, they thought it was a little bit weird because even though it's only, 5-6 years, you stood out if you were quote unquote that old and just starting college.
Yeah. It's always weird when there's like a group of people that are around the same age and then there's like that one person that's like, significantly older.
Yeah, exactly. Way older, definitely. So, he's going to Sierra College, which was pretty close to where he was living in Auburn. And one day on campus, he's walking through the commons outside and he spots this young lady with blonde hair. And she's got I saw a picture of it, a pretty big horned owl and a fledgling owl. And she's teaching them to fly just right there on the grounds, which is kind of cool. Yeah. And it turns out that she worked at the school's science lab in between classes as a lab assistant. So she's this, cute little blonde thing, and Joe walks over and he just immediately started chatting with her. He finds out that she's a sophomore student. She's 18 years old. Her name is Bonnie. And there's just a group of the other students that worked in the lab, and they're all kind of standing around talking, whatever. And then, they go about their business. And then I don't know how soon after, but it was said very shortly after their initial meeting, Joseph began showing up to the science lab, and he was a political science major, so there was no reason for him to be in the actual science building at all.
Right.
Like but it was one of those like, oh, I just happened to be in the area. So, he went to the lab and he's talking to her, and mind you, she's working there. She's not just there for funsies. Like, this is her job. And he's going there every day to talk to her, whatever. He's sitting with her while she's doing her lab work. And by the end of the week, after the first day that they met, he asked her out. So he was pretty pushy already.
Yeah.
He was pretty forward. And a lot of people thought that they were kind of an odd couple. Bonnie was a great student. She was very bright. She excelled academically. Her father was a principal at a second chance high school in Sacramento, and her mother was a teacher. In high school, Bonnie was the class treasurer, and she would even go to the Navy Hospital in Oakland on the weekends to visit injured Vietnam veterans. So, to me, she seemed like this smart, all-American, good girl, like, do no wrong. And then on the other side, so you have Bonnie, that's smart and comes from a decent family. And then on the other side of the coin, you have Joe, who's struggling with his grades, came from a broken home, is playing up this whole Vietnam War veteran appeal or whatever. And Bonnie was attracted to that. She thought that he was kind of a badass. He drove like a really awesome, he had a Plymouth Roadrunner, which is an awesome car. I read that it had a Hemi, which, sort of it's right up my alley. So, she was into him, and she began tutoring him. And then while they were spending more and more time together, Joe began to tell her stories about his time in the Vietnam War. He told her that the reason he was missing part of his, there goes another fucking firework. He said the reason he was missing part of his pinky finger was because he caught a stray bullet when he was in the war, but upon fact checking, yeah. Apparently, he actually had his finger severed by a metal drum that was rolling around below deck on one of the ships, and it smashed his finger and just severed the tip off. So he completely lied to her about that. But, he wanted to be more appealing to her, and he knew that she went to go visit injured Vietnam vets, so he was manipulating her, really. Like, he knows what she is a sucker for, and he's totally playing that up.
Yeah.
So, of course, they're spending a lot of time together, and eventually Bonnie's father, Stan, finds out about their relationship. And from what I read, her dad was pretty old school, set in his ways. He had his ideas of, gender roles, basically, and he was extremely unhappy about his 18-year-old daughter dating a man that was 5 years older than her.
Yeah.
And, I guess Joseph obviously knew about that, and then he kind of, once again, weasels his way in because he starts talking to Stan about his time in the Vietnam War after realizing that Stan himself was a World War II veteran. Yeah, so now they're buddy, whatever, so Joseph kind of gets in there. And then he also starts to become close with Bonnie's siblings, taking them for rides in his cool little Roadrunner, and they would go to the drive-in movie theater and stuff. So he just knows how to manipulate people. He knows how to elicit the response that he wants. And that's a behavior that we see in him already.
Yeah.
As their relationship progressed, Bonnie said that Joe became increasingly persistent about having sex. And mind you, they're not married yet. And premarital sex wasn't super kosher even at that time, even, you know, for somebody from a good family. Like, she didn't want to do that. So he kept pressuring her to have sex, and eventually they did. And she actually described having sex with him as, quote, exhausting and often painful.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Just as he was climaxing, he would break away and then return minutes later and resume intercourse, ejaculating again.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. He repeated the pattern 4 or 5 times over a 3-hour period.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And she said that he seemed completely oblivious to her pain, and that he bragged to her that he had trained himself to have, quote, mastery over his body. And now, this description is something that's going to be really, really important later on in the story.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, he's got just weird sexual habits, and he never forced himself on her, she said, but she said he was very, very pushy, and she described him as insatiable. Like, it was never enough for him. He definitely had some sort of issues with sex.
Yeah. Obviously.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. So at some point, he gives her an engagement ring, and it's said to be like shortly after they started the sexual aspect of their relationship. He gave her an engagement ring. And now, years later, Bonnie says she doesn't actually recall like an official proposal. They never set a date as to when they were actually going to have a wedding. She just went with it because that's what she did. You know, he kind of was like, she described him as being the alpha, and she just went along with whatever he did because that was just her personality.
And also for the time too, that was kind of like,
absolutely.
You know, the woman just shuts up, you know, and takes it.
Just goes with it. And apparently he had given her a 1/2-carat stone, which he said he got in Vietnam, so for the time, 1/2 carat is huge. And it's not like nowadays where people have like 5-carat engagement rings. It was huge, and she described it as being extremely high set on a very, very thin white gold band, and it was a solitary. So now she's working in a lab, mind you, so she's wearing gloves. And she said that the ring was just always in the way. It was always uncomfortable. It was always getting snagged on things. So she's already it was like, she, you know, kind of like an omen in a way.
Yeah.
But she just went with it. Whatever. They did an engagement announcement in the newspaper. Like, I saw a newspaper clipping that it was actually kind of cool to see it. But yeah, they did like an engagement announcement, whatever. And she herself had wanted to go to school, but you know, her family, they had a farm, and they were doing okay, but they didn't have money to send her to. She wanted to go to medical school. They didn't have money to send her, and she ended up going to junior college and then did nursing. And it was at this point that Joseph became interested in joining the California Highway Patrol.
Okay.
Bonnie had said that she felt that the engagement ring was kind of like a almost like he was marking his territory, where, you know, he knew she was working in a lab with other men, and he knew that she was going to be going to school, and he kind of wanted to just claim his territory.
Right.
And Bonnie also said that Joe had this kind of air of superiority to him, where he would act as if he was above the rules. He liked to almost, from the way it's described, almost like terrorized her a little bit. He would take her, he had a motorcycle, and there's this one story where it describes him going off of the road and onto like a hill, and she was terrified, even though she ended up realizing it was a path for bikes. She's on this motorcycle, and they're like on a paved road, and then all of a sudden they're off road. She thought they were going to die, until she realized that he kept circling around and going back and forth on this path, and he knew that it was upsetting her, and he did it more. Like, he was totally getting a kick on it.
Yeah, and that type of behavior comes into play later on too.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, he totally like was getting a kick out of this. And there is another part of the story where he would go down this certain road, and there was a large German Shepherd that would chase them on the bike, and now, you know, she's on the back of the bike, so she's probably freaking out that this dog's going to bite her on the ass.
Yeah.
And she said that he actually stuck his leg out and kicked the dog and snapped its neck, and the dog died instantly.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And he, now, you know, Bonnie, on the other hand, works with animals. Like, she's working in this lab, and she goes in, she takes care of the animals, she's teaching them. I mean, they met, and she was teaching a freaking owl how to fly. Like, she's an animal lover. And she said that he loved hunting. He would make her go hunting with him. He would make her go frog gigging with him. And she said it was always on somebody else's property where they weren't supposed to be. They had to climb fences to get onto it, and, you know, probably weren't supposed to be trespassing. And Bonnie, of course, being the kind of like goody two-shoes, was uncomfortable with it, but she would go along with it, of course, because she said that's, once again, just what she did. And he even gave her a rifle one time and had her kill a dove.
Oh.
And yeah, and she was just horrified. He was stoked about it, and she was horrified. She just didn't like it. And this behavior continued, and she just continued to become uncomfortable. She said he would spearfish illegally. He shot a vulture, which I don't know if they're protected or not, but shot a vulture, killed deer out of season, and all of this also while trespassing. And she's terrified that they're going to be caught and arrested for trespassing, or, you know, whatever, hunting out of season, anything like that. Yeah. But they stayed together. For whatever reason, she just stayed with him. Now, in 1971, they both were attending California State in Sacramento. And he was in the criminal justice program because he was wanting to pursue his career as a police officer in California. And he was failing one of his classes, of course, as usual, because he was not very bright. And he asked, I guess they were in the same class, which was abnormal psychology. He asked her if he could cheat off of her paper, and this was like the last straw for her.
Yeah.
She was absolutely not having any part of it. She was like, no, if I get caught letting you cheat off of my paper, and it's just not right, blah, blah, blah. She was not having it. She went to her parents' house, and actually, she said he became like obsessed with it. He just kept telling her, like, why won't you do this? You're going to be my wife. You owe me this, blah, blah, blah. So she went to her parents' house, and her father, who was the principal of a high school, was on her side. Of course, he's like, yeah, that's not right. You can't do that. That's dishonest. And if Bonnie gets caught, you're both going to get kicked out of school, whatever. So she actually ended up breaking up with him. She said, quote, "We're not a good fit." And he said, "But I love you. We're meant to be together. We're perfect together." And she said, "We're just not a good fit. I've already decided." And she gave him back the engagement ring.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe leaves the house, and they watched him walk away, and he throws the engagement ring into their backyard. And he leaves. They search the backyard for the ring because obviously it's probably worth a pretty penny if it's that huge and gold. And it's nowhere to be found. So they actually thought that he faked throwing the ring just to be a drama queen.
Wow.
Yep. And then days after they broke up, he's holding hands with some girl in the class that they both had together. Yeah. So then a few days after she sees him holding hands with this girl, Bonnie is asleep and hears somebody tapping on her bedroom window. So she goes and moves. She described it as like a thin cotton. Oh my God. I lost my place. Sorry. So she said it was like she pulled back the blinds or whatever, and it was Joe. And he's got a pistol pointed at her face.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And he says, "Get dressed. We're going to Reno." So she freaks the fuck out, goes and gets her dad, and she says, "Joe's outside, he has a gun, and he wants me to go to Reno with him and marry him right now." And the dad's like, "Go lock yourself in the bathroom and I'll deal with it." So the dad goes outside. 2 hours later, he comes back and tells her it's okay, he won't be coming back. The police were never called because it's assumed that Stan, who was Bonnie's father, didn't want to ruin Joe's chances of becoming a cop, so he never called the cops himself. But yeah, I can't imagine not calling the police for a situation like that. Like, he tried to abduct your fucking daughter.
Yeah.
It's fucking crazy. So after that, he actually didn't bother her again. That she only saw him one more time after that, but she was so terrified that she ended up dropping out for a whole semester and changing her major when she went back.
Wow.
Yeah. She ended up getting married the next year to a guy that was an accountant. And turns out that Joe ended up buying a house that was 2 miles away from where her and her husband ended up living.
Oh my God.
Yeah. She said she only saw him one more time after that, and it was they were in a mall, and he was there with a woman that she didn't recognize, and she was there with her husband. And as soon as she said he had a strange gait, like that was the first thing that she noticed about him when they first met in college, that he just, the way he carried himself and the way he walked was unique, and she recognized that in the mall. And he didn't see her, but she saw him and knew it was him by the way he was walking. And she said she grabbed her husband and ran into the first store that she could get to, just to hide from him.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Creepy.
Yes. So Joe ends up graduating in 1973 with his criminal justice degree, and he did a police internship in the Sacramento suburb of Roseville. And that is where I will leave off.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about his active years, his criminal history. So he began with burglaries in 1973, and he was actually known as the Cordova cat burglar or the Exeter ransacker. He was believed to be responsible for about 120 burglaries and possibly one murder within 20 months.
Oh my God.
Yeah. He would break into people's houses. He would vandalize their stuff, go through their possessions. He'd scatter women's underwear around. He would steal coins and low value, low value, low value or personal items. And he often overlooked banknotes and valuable items that were in plain sight.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So in 1976, DeAngelo progressed from burglary to rape in Carmichael, Citrus Heights, and Rancho Cordova, which is east of Sacramento. You said that in the beginning. He became known as the East Area Rapist. And his MO was to stalk mid-class neighborhoods at night, looking for women in usually one-story houses. They were alone. The house was often near a school, a creek, trail, or other open spaced areas to provide a quick escape. He was actually seen quite a few times, but always got away successfully. On one occasion, this young guy, I couldn't find his name. He tried to pursue him, but DeAngelo shot and wounded this kid. I'm guessing the kid was like, I don't know, maybe like late teens, early 20s.
Okay.
So most of the victims reported that they had seen or heard someone on their property before being attacked. Many experienced break-ins as well. It was believed that after stalking a home, he would break in when nobody was there to unlock windows, hide guns, and ligatures for later use.
Like, how fucking terrifying is that?
Yeah, it's fucking terrifying. He would also frequently call future victims for months prior to learn their daily routines.
Wow, I did not know that.
This is like some next level stuff. So normally targeting women alone in their homes or with children, he eventually preferred attacking couples by breaking through a window or sliding glass door, and he would awaken the targets and threaten them with a gun. He would force the female to tie up the male victim. He would then separate the couple. And this is really weird. I know that me and you talked about this a little bit, but this is so weird. He would sometimes stack dishes on the male's back and threaten that if he heard the dishes rattle, that he'd kill everyone in the house.
Yep.
So the woman would then be taken usually to the living room, and she'd be raped repeatedly, sometimes for several hours. He would often spend hours in the home, going through closets and drawers, eating their food, drinking beer that he took from their refrigerator. And on many occasions, these victims thought that when they thought that he finally left, he would jump out from the darkness and scare them.
Ugh.
So this was like an enjoyable game.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by the behavior comes back into play, because he obviously like gets his rocks off by scaring people. When he finally did leave, he would creep away really quietly, and these victims were not sure if he was actually gone or not, because he was like playing with them, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean that's
horrifying.
Yeah. How he would get away is he would actually run through people's yards, then use a bicycle to go home or to get to a car. And he was active in Sacramento County from June 1976 until May 1977.
Okay.
He then took a 3-month break and then struck again in San Joaquin. I'm guessing that's how you pronounce it because it's spelled like Joaquin Phoenix. So he then struck again in San Joaquin County before returning to Sacramento for all but one of the next 10 attacks. He attacked 5 times during the summer of 78 in Stanislaus and Yolo counties. That's funny. I don't know. YOLO's. YOLO. I hate that so much.
Oh, yeah. Glad it's not a thing anymore.
No, it is not. Who started that? Was it Drake or somebody?
For sure.
I mean, that explains it. So yeah, so he Yolo counties, and before moving primarily to Contra Costa County in October, which lasted until October 1979. And if you go on like Wikipedia and look him up or anything, there's actually a list of 50 rapes that are documented by him.
Just insanely nauseating, the amount of people that were victimized by this guy. And not to mention their partners or whoever was there at the time. It was usually a husband or a spouse, whatever.
Yeah.
Just seeing, I watched an interview, and this was however many years later, and this man is still getting choked up talking about how his friends said, oh, well, you couldn't do anything. And he's like, I couldn't do anything. I was tied hands and feet, and there was a stack of plates on me. And he said if he heard the plates move, he was going to kill us anyway.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, how about you be in the position, guy?
Yeah. And he's just one of many, I'm sure. He's just the one that I happen to see. But you could see the anguish on his face still to this day.
Terrible.
Yeah.
So on the night of February 2nd, 1978, a young couple from Sacramento, Brian and Katie Majori, were walking their dog in the Rancho Cordova area. And actually 5 of the East Area Rapist attacks happened nearby. There was a confrontation with DeAngelo on the street. And when the Majoris tried to flee, they were shot and killed.
Yeah.
In late summer of 1979, DeAngelo moved to Southern Cali. I don't know why I said Cali, California.
SoCal, bro.
Gross. So there he began to kill first in Santa Barbara County in October. The murders lasted until 1981, with a single attack occurring in 1986. And only the first couple he attacked around that time had survived. They actually were able to alert neighbors, which forced DeAngelo to flee. The other victims were murdered either by gunshot or they were bludgeoned to death. Ugh. Yeah. And he at this time obviously he was not linked to these attacks. I mean, for decades.
Yeah.
He then became known as the original Night Stalker after Richard Ramirez received the nickname, which is like so true.
Yeah.
And among those murdered were Robert Offerman and Deborah Alexandra Manning, who were found dead at Offerman's condo in Goleta. Charlene and Lyman Smith were then found murdered in their Ventura home. Charlene had also been raped. Keith and Patrice Harrington were next. They were bludgeoned to death in their home. They had only been married for 3 months.
Oh.
Yeah. 28-year-old Manuela Witham was raped and killed in her Irvine home. Sherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez were the 10th and 11th victims attacked in Domingo's residence in Goleta. And this was only blocks away from Robert Offerman's condo. And Sherry Sherry Domingo was only living there temporarily.
Oh my gosh.
I think a relative owned it, and the relative was letting her stay there just temporarily.
Wow.
Yeah. And then 18-year-old Janelle Lisa Cruz was found raped and murdered. Her family was on vacation in Mexico when the attack happened.
Shit.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, like I said, these murders were not linked to the East Area Rapist at first.
Mm-hmm.
But later on, the cases were linked almost entirely by DNA testing.
Wow.
Yeah. So those are his active years. And it's, like I said, it's just like he's just like he likes to play with these people, and he likes to see how far he could take it.
Oh yeah, he totally got off on terrorizing people. He got off on the mind games. He would watch the news and see what they were saying about him. And mind you, I know you and I had talked about this, and I don't know if you were going to discuss it or not, but at the time in the 70s, there was a lot of PSAs that were put
Yep.
out about this, and they called him EAR, EAR, East Area Rapist, but they would call him EAR for short. And it was just hysteria. People were terrified. Gun sales went up. Women were actually learning how to shoot because they were so scared. He started out initially only attacking women that were by themselves, and then the news said, oh, he's seeming to only attack women that are by themselves. So then he would see that, and then he would start attacking women that were married, or like he knew what he was doing, and he was extremely manipulative of people's fears, and he would exploit that.
Very calculated.
Yes.
It's terrifying.
Yes. And like you were saying, he was breaking into these homes and basically setting up his workshop, if you will. Like he was like a day in the office to him. I mean, it's just so fucking crazy to imagine that he had.
I don't even think it was like it. Sorry, I don't even think it was like a day in the office. I think it was like a day of fun,
Yeah, a day at Disney World.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, he loved it. And it's really, really fucked up to think about how long he was terrorizing these neighborhoods. And another thing that's really horrible is that nothing was really done about it until there was maybe an eighth, I want to say 8 or 11. Like there was a very high number of rapes that had occurred and before it was ever even covered on the news.
Yeah, and I think they had only like one suspect or something who it turned out that they couldn't prove that he did it, and he was innocent, and he was let go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know I say this a lot, but it is like out of a horror movie.
Yeah. He had the entire East area in his grip.
It reminds me of like, he did. It reminds me of, especially how you were saying how, women were learning how to shoot and stuff like that. It reminds me of Son of Sam, when girls, because he typically liked girls with long brown hair, I believe. Yep. And so they were wearing like blonde wigs, or they were cutting their hair, and
Yep, or always wearing a ponytail.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think also Ted Bundy too was the same type of thing, but I think with Son of Sam it was like a state of panic, because
for sure. Yeah, throughout the whole city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like all of New York. I don't know if I ever mentioned this, but my mom was probably like, I don't know, 18 or something like that when Son of Sam was active. And apparently, so her and her friends, and I think one of her cousins, were going to a club somewhere in Nassau County, and I guess they said, because you know how Son of Sam would like tell the newspaper like where he was going to be, kind
Yeah.
of. I guess there was like a report that he was going to be on Long Island in like that area, and I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure I remember my mom telling me that like my grandpa like walked into the club that she was at and like dragged her out of there. It was
No way.
yeah,
I don't blame him, man.
I know. But I mean,
That's
how
crazy.
embarrassing if you see your father walk in, like you're of age, you see your father walk in, like get home. And my
You're
grandpa
coming
is,
home.
yeah, and my grandpa is like such a nervous guy that like, I mean, if he doesn't hear, if you tell him like, hey, Poppy, can you lower that? And he doesn't hear like all of what you said, he's like, what happened? Is everything okay?
Oh,
You
so
know?
he's like super high strung.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just seeing him walk in, I would be so embarrassed at
Oh yeah.
first.
I'm sure she was mortified.
Yeah.
But that's how it was. People were absolutely just terrified of being attacked. And
Yeah.
it's, like you said, very similar to this, where he kind of had control over this entire area.
Yeah. It's crazy how this was like I don't want to say common, but this type of thing with like, a serial killer or a serial rapist um was like a thing like it was like kind of normal in like the 70s,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
which is
It was a very weird time, man. A
yeah.
lot of shit went down.
Yeah, I mean there was like Bundy well, I mean I think Bundy was I think finally apprehended in the 80s, but still like 70s going to 80s. Well, I think Manson was like late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
Um East Area Rapist, obviously. Um Son of Sam, Richard Ramirez.
Yeah.
It's just like
What
like
what was in
what
the water at that point in time?
I
Like,
know.
what the fuck?
I think people were just also more easily accessible as far as like I guess before that time it wasn't, seen that often. So, you would I mean even when I was a kid and I'm sure we've talked about this before, when I was a kid like I would, walk down the block and hang out with all the kids on the street,
Oh
and
yeah.
now I would not let Mia do that
No
at
way.
at this age. But meanwhile I was doing that like younger.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to figure too, at that point in time, there's no way of communication. There's really, not like how it is now. I mean, yeah, maybe you had a house phone, but not like here, or 2020, you have a device on you that has GPS, that has
Right.
everything you could ever need. I mean, there's even a 911 shortcut on the iPhone. I don't know about
Yep.
other phones, but it's so much
And even
easier.
if you don't have service, you
Yeah.
could still call 911 from anywhere.
Yeah, I got stuck in an elevator once and I didn't have service and I had to call 911. But
Oh,
anyway,
that's scary.
yeah, I was by myself. The building was empty. It was weird.
Oh,
Anyway, but it's true. So you have to consider that as well, which it was just prime time
yeah.
for serial killers and serial rapists. Uh, Also, Samuel Little. I mean, he's
Right, right.
one of the most active killers and rapists, and it was also during that time. I mean, it
Yeah.
was.
Was Dahmer in the 70s? No, that was more the 80s, right?
I think he was more 80s. Let's see.
Yeah.
Let me Google it.
I'm
Plug
pretty
it
sure
into
he
the
I'm pretty
Goog.
sure yeah, I'm pretty sure he was like even early
Early
90s.
90s. Yeah, it says
Yeah.
he was active from 78 to 91.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
Well, we are just almost to an hour, so we're going to stop here and we'll be back with part 2 and we'll talk about some more stuff. Don't forget to support us on Patreon if you're able.
Yeah, check it
Um,
out.
yeah, and then we'll make a post when we get on YouTube, get something up on YouTube. And stay safe.
Wash your
Wash your
hands.
hands.
And don't
kill your family. Thanks, guys.
Bye, sinners.
Bye, sinners.